Welcome to the...
Well, how about a desk day trip now, Duncan? Because it's time to take a trip to the Six Museum. This is the only museum where you will find all sorts of objects from the most esoteric, exciting, interesting, unusual museums all around the country, which have been donated to our own Six Museum. We've got a ship figurehead from the HMS Colossus from the Valhalla Museum of Ship Figureheads. We've got a pencil from World War II. That was a spy's pencil with a secret map and compass hidden inside. A flyer from the first UK rave, and from the National Waterfront Museum, a lesbian and gay men support the miners banner, made for the film Pride in 2014. We have so many fascinating objects, and we're about to receive another because we are off to the Board Games Museum with Tony Boydell, who's on the line. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Hello, Tony. You're right. So where are you exactly? Where would we find the Board Games Museum if we want to come and see you in person?
Well, we are in the small Forest of Dean town of Newent.
Okay. And how long have you been there?
I opened the museum in August of last year and very quickly filled up the small space that I've got.
Now, so Tony, this opening a museum, was it, be honest, a place to put your massive collection because it could no longer fit in your house? I mean, I'm assuming this stemmed from a passion for you.
Yes, indeed. There is a certain element of truth to that. I've been designing and publishing board games for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And in about 2012, I had a breakthrough game called Snowdonia, which was about building the railway up Mount Snowdon. And the players represented small groups of workers who were digging and suffering the Welsh weather. That got me really obsessed with railway games. And there's so many early 20th century games with railway themes that have beautiful artwork, beautiful little figures. Yeah. And that kind of got me falling into the rabbit hole of vintage games, as opposed to the more modern games that I design nowadays.
I mean, it's so interesting, this, isn't it? The history of board games, it goes back millennia, presumably. I mean, chess is, early medieval, but then you've got, in the Far East, games that are thousands of years old.
Indeed.
When did it kind of really flower in the UK? Would it have been when you could produce these things and kind of send them out? Is it sort of Trivial Pursuits and post-Victorian era, that type of time?
Well, in card play with traditional decks of cards has been always popular, but it's always sort of been frowned on up until the early 19th century as sort of gambling,
right,
rather than play. And in the early 19th century, you get the growth of games where you roll or spin a teetotum and move from a start to a finish, and you're educated along the way. Mm. So they're historical pastimes where you learn about the history of England from 1066 right up to George III. You've got morality games, a Cottage of Content, and you've got things like the Game of Goose, which were very much about educating and spiritual morality education as well.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt. Would they build that in to kind of make it okay to play as a bit of a sort of marketing thing? Okay, so we can sell you this because it's not gambling; it's teaching you to live the right way.
Yes, indeed, absolutely right.
All right, go on. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that by the end of the 19th century, we go away from that kind of educational sort of middle to upper class approach to games like Tiddlywinks, Snap, and Happy Families. And then we sort of go into racing games and oddly in the 1920s and 30s, the emergence of gambling games again, horse racing and dog racing, which became very popular parlour games. So as much as they try to avoid sort of the bad experience of gambling, perhaps, it always creeps in eventually.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? And what's the attraction for you? I mean, are you always looking for the perfect kind of game format? Is it just the thrill of playing? What do you love about board games?
I love the artwork. I love the inventiveness of the mechanisms that the designers put into their games. I love the social aspect of board gaming, the fact that you can sit down with a group of people and you can play.
Yeah.
A lot of the games that I've got in the museum are forgotten about. Modern gaming has a very different style, a different level of complexity, but there's lots of really interesting ways of playing that are buried in those historical games. And I, to some extent, am trying to find and mine those games, to inform new designs and introduce them to modern players.
So, Tony, as you said, the museum's quite new. You know, you started not that long ago. What kind of experience is it for visitors? And how often do you actually play? Because I think you host game nights, don't you?
I do. We have a weekly games night where folks come along and they play some of the more modern games. But I do try and slip in the occasional vintage game every now and again. I've got quizzes that help people guide themselves around the museum to sort of hunt for the answers to questions. I've got a couple of games where you actually have to run around the museum and search for specific things, which then they're a bit like treasure hunts, really, and they lead you to the next thing. And I actually I encourage people to take games off the shelf, those that aren't sort of too precious. I get them to take them off the shelf, and we look at the components, we play part of the game perhaps. It's a game museum, but it's also a place to play games. That's really important.
Oh, I love that, Tony's games in practice and not just as objects. So what have you chosen for us for the Six Museum? What have you gone for?
Well, I've chosen a game which I hope the Six Museum will let people play because it really is an awful lot of fun. It's a game called Seawinks by H.P. Gibson's. And Gibson's are still going, actually, as a jigsaw and games company. But this is from the 1920s. And the elevator pitch is Tiddlywinks meets Battleships.
Oh, yeah. Two classics. What could possibly go wrong? This is the ultimate bog-off. And you've played it, I presume, Tony. Is it fun?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It's a two-player game. And basically, you are using your Tiddlywinks to either move your ships on a map board towards your opponent's ships and their enemy base, which is what you're trying to destroy.
Yeah.
Or you can fire off a salvo of shots at your opponent's ship. And if you hit your opponent's ship, they take a damage. If you try and move your ship and it lands on the land, it runs aground, you lose shots and take damage on your ship. And basically, you just keep going until all the ships have been sunk or you've managed to hit your opponent's fortress and kill them.
Seawinks. I am all over it. What I love about Tiddlywinks is that, you know, it's almost onomatopoeic in that it is exactly as it sounds, like it's utterly ridiculous and fun and flippant, but then it very quickly turns intensely serious.
Yes, indeed.
Weirdly.
Yeah. I mean, there are other Tiddlywinks games I have in the museum. There's a Tiddly golf game, which is exactly as you'd expect it to be, and this edition comes with little railway sort of type furniture, so you've got bunkers and flags and obstacles. And I've even got a Tiddly tennis game as well. I
mean, amazing. But Seawinks is definitely the right one to go for me personally, Tony. That just fits like a glove. It's perfect. Thank you for giving that to the Six Museum. Lots of love to you. I know that you're on Facebook if people want to find you, the Museum of Board Games.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And on Patreon and Instagram as well. Yes. If you search for the Museum of Board Games on any of those platforms, you'll find us there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us today, Tony. And I hope you have a happy day playing and at the museum. And I hope our paths cross in person one day. Lots of love. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Cheers. Tony Boydell on BBC Six Music from the Board Games Museum. So the Museum of Board Games on Facebook, as he said, and Instagram too.